Good afternoon, America. Welcome to Right Side Broadcasting Network live at 1:30 in Washington, D.C. Now, the Fed chair, too late, Jerome Powell will speak at 2:30, but we look forward to President Trump also to sign a bill into law during this hour. So stick with us here as we recap a great successful trip to the United Kingdom and Scotland. $750 billion agreed to of energy wealth pouring into the United States. This is good for Europe. This is good for international security. Remember the German government complaining the fact that Russia was over control of them with too much influence. Well, why were they purchasing oil and gas and those energy needs from the Russian Federation, which then led to the ability to invade the sovereign nation of Ukraine? Well, this trip having a lot to do with that, all packaged into fairness. And the European Union President Ursula von der Leyen did say that to President Trump, that we need fairness and equality in the trade deal. And for too long, there's been a deficit for the United States and a surplus for the European Union. They were eating our lunch thanks to the neocon and neoliberal agenda of the past. And she acknowledged how tough of a negotiator he truly is, the deal maker in chief. Also $600 billion in addition to that coming into the United States and opening up European markets for small and middle-sized businesses. So this is really a whirlwind success over the course of June and July that have been two of the most successful months for any modern president, if not any president in American history. In addition to that agreement, a 15% tariff that the European Union has to take in order to access United States markets. President Trump to sign a congressional bill forthcoming, so stick with us here on Right Side Broadcasting Network Live as economic growth shatters expectations as President Trump fuels America's golden age. Now today, the message from the White House is clear. GDP growth came in above market expectations. And as of yesterday, when President Trump traveled back from Scotland, consumer confidence rose. Americans trust in President Trump's America First agenda that continues to prove the so-called experts wrong. President Trump has reduced America's reliance on foreign products, boosting investment in the United States, and created thousands of jobs, delivering on the promise to make America wealthy again. This data is clear, and there are no more excuses. Now is the time for too late Jerome Powell to cut those rates. This is all according to the GOAT of press secretaries, Caroline Leavitt, stating that earlier today. Now, here's what you need to know. The so-called experts were wrong once again. The United States economy grew at 3.0% pace in quarter two. This shatters economists' expectations, with nearly 3/4 of economists surveyed by Bloomberg getting it wrong. And it was the whole tariff scare and the panicans who were obsessed with the fact that the tariffs would somehow hurt the American economy. The opposite is happening, and billions, in fact, trillions of wealth coming this direction into the United States. Now, consumer spending growth accelerated as inflation remains right on track. Real consumer spending growth rose from Q1 by 0.5% to Q2, 1.4%. The Personal Consumption Expenditures Price Index, otherwise known as PCE, is the Fed's preferred measure of inflation. That rose by just 2.1% in quarter two and down from 3.7% last quarter, while the PCE rose by 2.5%, down from 3.5% last quarter. Americans' total real disposable income rose at a strong 3% in quarter two after similarly strong 2.5% increase, that percentage, from the first quarter of this year. Now, growth is being driven by the private sector, not by the government. Federal government spending fell for the second straight quarter, while real business fixed investment rose by 1.9% following its first quarter surge. In the final 2 quarters of the Biden administration, real business fixed investment rose at an average pace of just 0.5% compared to 6.1% in the first 2 quarters of the Trump administration. President Trump's Made in America agenda is working, and President Trump is reducing our reliance on foreign products, boosting U.S. investment and creating jobs as he secures the biggest trade deal in world history. Auto output rose at 35.5%, its annual rate, the biggest increase since 2020 during the pandemic. As President Trump revitalizes the American auto industry, and that's from Detroit all the way down to Charleston, South Carolina, throughout Georgia, Alabama, so many manufacturing plants. In fact, Hyundai and Kia, as a result of these great trade deals, investing countless dollars and time, talent, and treasure in the Southeast United States, and Toyota joining those great names as well. Now, manufacturing output has surged 1.8% in the first 5 months of President Trump's second term, after a 0.7% negative decline in the final 5 months before President Trump's inauguration. Economic momentum continues to build, defying expectations at every single turn. For 5 straight months, core inflation has come down in below the market expectation and remains right in line with the Fed's inflation target. In June, consumer spending and industrial production beat expectations, while jobless claims have fallen for 6 weeks in a row. Customs and tariff revenues have totaled $150+ billion in President Trump's second term, leading to the first June budget surplus in nearly a decade. And housing starts and permits for new builds both rose in June above expectations. And this is all on the heels of Vice President Vance championing the One Big Beautiful Bill in his home state, the Buckeye state of Ohio. Surrounded by hardworking American steelworkers in Canton, Ohio earlier this week, Vice President J.D. Vance laid out and celebrated why President Trump's One Big Beautiful Bill was a landmark achievement that delivers the largest tax cuts in history for working class Americans, and the middle class specifically, driving down the energy bills, strengthening Medicaid, funds securing borders, and rewards U.S. companies for growing right here at home. Now, Fox 8 News locally stating that Vice President J.D. Vance visits Canton to promote Republicans' big new tax law, stating that the Big Beautiful Bill was a game changer, especially the no tax on overtime provision and the full expensing of capital investments. And Medalist CEO Mike Williams, these measures empower companies like ours to invest, grow, and support families across the country. Many of the steelworkers who heard Vance's address told Fox 8 afterwards that they were happy with what they heard. If it makes us grow more profitable, bring more money in, let's do it. Let's do it for the country. Let's make it great again. And that was according to Cody Swanson, who's an expert in the manufacturing field there right in the beautiful state of Ohio. Thank you to our sponsors on the right side of history, All Family Pharmacy. This is the go-to. It's 138 on the East Coast. If you order today through allfamilypharmacy.com/RSBN, don't worry. If you don't have insurance, there's no red tape, no bureaucracy. You just need a prescription and doctors on the other end that can prescribe that. Healthcare providers, nurses, practitioners, also pharmacists who care about getting the life-saving medications to your door. It will arrive within 24 hours with code 10% off there, RSBN10. That's RSBN10 for 10% off. Michael Kunzler, the generous co-owner of this fine organization, is also giving more off, so 35% off if you order now. We're going to toss there now to Washington, D.C., the President of the United States signing this new congressional bill.
Big deal, big country, actually. And they're wonderful, and hopefully wonderful for both sides. But it's literally trillions of dollars ultimately being brought into our country. And it was something that had to be done, and it is being done, and it's being done properly. We're now negotiating with various other countries, and the rest we're just sending out the the bill too. We send a bill, we send a letter saying that you'll pay a certain tariff. And obviously, that's most of them because you have, as you know, hundreds of countries. There are a lot of countries out there. So we look at the deficit or we look at the surplus and we look at the country and how the country's treated us, and lots of other things go into the equation. And we make a decision as to what that tariff will be, and it's a pretty standard letter from that point on. And I want to tell you, this is something to me, it's a VA bill signing, and it's very important to me and to many of the people in this room. So I'm thrilled to sign the VA Home Loan Program Reform Act into law, and that is something that they've wanted to do for a long time. This legislation provides desperately needed relief to veterans and their families who have fallen behind on their mortgages, of which there are a lot, because we have somebody that doesn't want to lower interest rates and probably won't lower them today. It's a really sort of an amazing situation. And it helps keep our promise to end veterans' homelessness. And we're going to do that for America. We're going to do that for our great veterans. I'm thrilled to be joined by the bill's sponsor, Congressman Derek Van Orden. Where's Derek?
Right here.
Derek? Hello, Derek. I didn't see you back there.
Well, I'm a Navy SEAL. Snuck up.
That's you. And Mike, how are you, Mike?
Mr. President.
These two gentlemen are terrific. They are working together, and they've been working together, Mike, a long time on this. So I just want to thank you both, and I'll ask you to say a couple of words. An estimated 61,000 American veterans are in danger of losing their homes, as you know. But thanks to this bill, the Department of Veterans Affairs will be empowered to pay loan holders the necessary amount to prevent foreclosures on our veterans, so our veterans won't be foreclosed and put out onto the streets. It's very important. This bill also creates a 5-year partial claim program that could benefit up to 3.7 million veterans. That's the kind of numbers you're talking about. It's big stuff. The costs of the program are fully offset and will add nothing at all to debt. This common sense legislation had overwhelming support and passed unanimously in the House and the Senate. Wow. When was the last time that happened? That's pretty impressive. My administration is committed to doing everything possible to ensure that our veterans are treated with respect and treated as well as anybody in this country. They're so important. They're so great. They've suffered so much, in many cases. In May, I signed an executive order to open the National Center for Warrior Independence in Los Angeles, California, which will house up to 6,000 homeless veterans. You know, until we came along, they treated the veterans far worse than the illegal immigrants. They came in, they were staying in hotels, luxury hotels, and the veterans are staying outside of the sidewalk on the same hotel. Some pictures are just incredible. In addition, we'll also be opening a full-service VA center in New Hampshire, which is the only state in the union to not have a VA center. And I made that promise to the people of New Hampshire a long while ago, and we got it done. It's the only state that doesn't have, and yet you have a lot of veterans in New Hampshire. We're slashing the wait times at VA medical centers, and we're bringing back VA choice and VA accountability, which I had and the Democrats abandoned. It made it so much better. Accountability, meaning if you treat our veterans badly, we treat you badly. You get fired and beyond that. And VA choice is you can get out and you can, if you don't have a doctor ready, willing, and able to take care of you within the VA, you go outside, you go see a doctor, you get better, and we pay the bill. And the veterans loved it. We had a 92% approval rating. And what did the Democrats do? They came along and they ended both of them, and they hired back many of the people that we fired. We fired people and replaced them with great, loving people. But we fired people who were sadists. In many cases, they were sick. They were thieves. They were stealing. And they hired them back. The accountability, meaning the VA accountability, it was a big deal getting it passed because you have unions, you have all sorts of problems to go through. We got it through everything. And the Democrats, as soon as they got back, they hired many of the worst people right back, and we're getting rid of them. But I want to thank the two gentlemen standing behind me, and I'd like to ask you just to say a couple of words, and then we'll take a few questions if you'd like, and we'll sign the bill, and our veterans will be very happy about it. Thank you. Mike, do you want to start?
Sure. Well, first off, thank you, Mr. President, for signing this bill today. Let me tell you that not only this bill, which will help make sure that those veterans have got themselves in a situation where maybe they would be foreclosed on, it gives them just a little bit extra help without the government going into a banking business like what we had with the previous administration. I also want to say thank you too, though, for appointing Doug Collins as our secretary for the VA. As chairman of the VA, having the opportunity to work with Doug, one, because we worked together before, but he has the right attitude, and the attitude is the VA is not about bureaucracy. It's about the veterans, and we want to keep it that way. That doesn't mean we don't have a good workforce. What it means is that workforce is focused on the veterans, not on making sure that the VA grows, but making sure that the VA does the job it's supposed to do. And thank you, Mr. President. It's your leadership that allows that to happen.
Thank you, everybody, for coming here today. Thank you, Mr. President, for hosting us here. I'm the longest-serving enlisted member of the United States military to ever get elected to Congress in the history of our nation. And I'm unequivocally stating right now that President Donald J. Trump is the most positive, pro-veteran president in the history of this country. And so he backs up his words with deeds, and this is another example of how President Trump is taking care of our veterans. So, sir, I'm very thankful for you, for your leadership, and let's get this thing done and get our veterans into homes. So God bless you, and God bless the United States.
Thank you, my friend. Thank you. Let's sign first, and we'll take a couple of questions. Yes. We'll get it done. We've been waiting a long time. And I do want to commend Doug Collins, because I hear he's doing
a fantastic job.
He's done an incredible job. Okay. That's a good one.
That's a good one.
No auto pen? It's a very important bill, and we want to thank everybody for the great help, but in particular, you two guys have done a fantastic job. Thank you very much. Okay, take the pen. Take the pen. Take another pen. And we'll take them and give them to the other people to help. Okay?
Very well.
Okay, questions?
Mr. President, you said that higher interest rates are making it harder for veterans to refinance. In a stronger than expected GDP report this morning, what do you say to analysts who worry that lowering interest rates would actually lead to inflation?
Well, if that happens, then we just raise them. What you do is you lower them, and let's see if there's inflation. Right now, there's no inflation. Everybody thought there would be. All we have is billions of dollars of cash pouring into our country from other countries that took advantage of us for many, many years. You know, they were taken advantage of. We were like the stupid people that didn't know what they were doing. They took advantage of us. Other countries, friend and foe. And by the way, the friend was oftentimes much worse than the foe when it comes to trade. So if that happens, what you do is you raise your rates and you do what you have to do to stop inflation. But we're keeping the rates high, and it's hurting people from buying houses, and we don't want that. If for any reason that happened in a year or two, if there's some signs of inflation coming back, right now there's not. We have a great thing going. I think we're going to have the richest economy you've ever seen. We have money coming in that we've never even thought about, at numbers that nobody's ever seen before. We have a deal with Japan where they're going to pay us $550 billion. We have a deal with Europe where they're doing $750 billion plus $400 billion plus $300 billion. And many other countries, it's likewise, you know, relatively, those are two big ones, but likewise. So we have a lot of money coming in, and we have no inflation, and we're very strong, and we should be lowering the rates. You know, each point that this gentleman keeps up costs us $365 billion a year. Think of that. 1 point, $365 billion. If you bring it down a point, we save 365. We should be the lowest interest rate, and we're not. We're 38, number 38, because of the Fed. It's all because of the Fed. He's done a bad job. Now, he's got a meeting today, but I call him too late. You know, he's always too late. Even if he does it today, probably won't. I hear they're going to do it in September, not today. For what reason? Nobody knows. But Europe, as you know, cut their rates 11 times in the last short period of time. But the good news is we're doing better than anybody anywhere in the world. Nobody's doing anything even close to us, even with the higher rates. The higher rates do affect housing, though, because people can't go out and get a loan or refinance their house. And it would be nice to have them be able to do that. That would be just another check of a box. That would be very important. Yeah, please.
Mr. President, you mentioned today that India, in addition to its 25% tariff rate, would pay an additional penalty because of its support of Russia. What is that additional penalty? And are other countries facing the same threat?
Well, we're negotiating right now, and it's also BRICS. You know, they have BRICS, which is basically a group of countries that are anti the United States, and India is a member of that, if you can believe it. It's an attack on the dollar, and we're not going to let anybody attack the dollar. So it's partially BRICS, and it's partially the trade, this trade situation. It's the deficit. We had a tremendous deficit. So, as you know, Prime Minister Modi is a friend of mine, but they don't do very much business in terms of business with us. They sell a lot to us, but we don't buy from them. You know why? Because the tariff is so high. They have one of the highest tariffs in the world. Now, they're willing to cut it very substantially, but we'll see what happens. We're talking to India now. We'll see what happens. It doesn't matter too much whether we have a deal or whether we charge them a certain tariff, but you'll know at the end of this week. August 1st is a very big day for this country because money is going to pour into the United States like we've never seen before. Yes, ma'am.
Thank you, Mr. President. Senator Hawley introduced legislation that would ban members of Congress from owning or trading individual stocks. It extends to the president and the vice president. Are you in favor of that legislation?
Well, I like it conceptually. I don't know about it, but I like it conceptually. And, you know, Nancy Pelosi became rich by having inside information. She made a fortune with her husband, and I think that's disgraceful. So in that sense, I'd like it, but I'd have to really see I study these things very carefully, and this just happened. So I'll take a look at it. But conceptually, I like it. And what I do think is Nancy Pelosi should be investigated because she has the highest return of anybody practically in the history of Wall Street, save a few. How did that happen? It happened by she knows exactly what's going to happen, what's going to be announced. She buys stock, and then the stock goes up after the announcement's made. And she ought to be investigated.
Mr. President, Harvard is reportedly willing to settle with you for $500 million. Is that enough?
Well, it's a lot of money. We're negotiating with Harvard now. They would like to settle, so we'll see what happens.
Mr. President, what is America's debt to our Afghan war allies that kept our veterans safe over there? There's been some talk about sending a lot of them back.
No,
would you let your administration do that?
We know the good ones and we know the ones that maybe aren't so good. You know, some came over that aren't so good. And we're going to take care of those people. The ones that did a job, the ones that were told certain things. A shame what happened. One of the most disgraceful episodes in the history of our country. The way we left Afghanistan was just a disgrace. But I understand your question fully, and we'll take care of 90% of your question, okay? I know what you mean. Thank you very much.
Mr. President, on the tariffs on India, are you still open to negotiate with India on the tariff front?
Well, we're talking to them now. We'll see what happens. Again, India was the highest or just about the highest tariff nation in the world. And one of the highest, 100 points, 150 points or percentages. So India was one of the highest in the world. They had won 175%, and higher than that. You know, there's another higher one is Canada. They've been charging our farmers 200%, 300%, 400% for years, and nobody did anything about it. But India is one of the highest, so we're going to see. We're negotiating with India right now.
Mr. President, Kash Patel reportedly found burn bags of Russiagate materials, and I'd love to get your thoughts on that.
He said what?
Burn bags of Russiagate materials
I
that
don't
the
know
FBI
that.
supposedly found.
I don't know that. I don't know what you mean by that statement. Say
Bags full of Russiagate
a
documents.
burn bag. I thought you said appointed a man named Burn Bag. Go ahead. You got to speak up.
thousands of documents in these bags, supposedly burned bags at the FBI in the secret room.
Well, I want everything to be shown, you know, as long as it's fair and reasonable. I think it will be shown and it should be shown. And I think he feels that way, and I think Pam feels that way. But it's got to be, you know, it's got to be stuff that really doesn't hurt people unfairly, because you have so many people involved. And if they can do that in a fair way, I think it's great. I think it's really great. The whole thing is a scam. It's a scam set up by the Democrats, and they love talking about it. But I would like to see people exposed that might be bad, and we'll see how that all works out. But it's getting to be very old news. You know, if they had anything, they would have done it the week before the election, because they were losing by a lot. If they had anything, they would have done it. They controlled the file. The Democrats controlled it. Comey and all this, you know, sleazebags, every one of them that you read about all the time. And I guess they've got some problems now having to do with yet a different scandal, very big one. But they control that file. So I would think that if they would have had something in the file, they would have released it about a week before the election, maybe 2 weeks, right, Brian? That's right. Go ahead.
Mr. President, welcome home, by the way.
Thank you very much.
Good to see you.
It was a great trip. It was an amazing trip.
You look good.
For the country. For me, it was okay, but for the country, it was an amazing trip. Go ahead.
It was. Many parents are preparing to send their kids back to school in a few weeks. Now, this will be the first time they've gone back to school under the second administration for you. Now, the previous administration labeled a lot of parents domestic terrorists for showing up at school board meetings. What's your message to parents now as they return their kids to school, knowing that they have the support of you?
Well, the beautiful thing is, as you know, we've gotten rid of the woke. Woke is gone, and I think pretty well buried. We're going to make sure it's buried. But the parents are now taking over the school boards. They're getting rid of these people that probably didn't like the children very much based on what they were doing. And it's a big difference. And, you know, one of the other things, and I keep watching these talking points that the Democrats have, they say, oh, prices are up. No, prices are way down. Fuel is down. Groceries are down. Things like eggs are way down. You know, when I came in my first week, the eggs had gone up like 4 or 5 times. Nobody had ever seen anything like it. And they were hitting me about eggs. I said, I just got here. It was one of my first news, maybe my first news conference. And we have eggs down now to a point where they were actually lower than even before. So I just want everyone to know prices are way down. And that's a big thing. Groceries, everything. If you look at fuel, $2.35 a gallon, a lot of that. But we actually had 4 states where it's down $1.99 as opposed to $3.50, $4. And it went up a lot higher than that. They got rid of my policy, and then it went through the roof. And then they brought my policy back, but it was too late. They blew it. We had the highest inflation in the history of our country. And now we have no inflation. We have nothing but cash coming in. The world respects us again. We're a really great, proud country. And I say it, I'll say it again, many, many leaders of other countries, I'm dealing with a lot of them today on their tariff situation. They owe us a lot of money. But many countries said to me, and almost in the same words, you were a dead country 1 year ago, and today you're the hottest country anywhere in the world. We are the hottest country right now anywhere in the world, and that's why we're taking care of our veterans. Okay? Thank you very much, everybody.
China. Mr. President, on China, the Secretary Best is briefing today.
Thank you guys. Thank you, press.
We're moving along with China. We're doing fine with China. I think it's going to work out very well. We're right in step. I think we're going to have a very fair deal with China. Thank you.
Mr. President, what did you think Epstein was stealing the women for?
Thank you, press.
And President Trump signing bills into law with Congressman Derek Van Orden, also a former Navy SEAL from Wisconsin's 3rd District, and Representative Mike Bost of Illinois from the 12th District. And congressional praise really coming across from the Republican caucus for this great president of ours, and addressing some questions regarding the recent trip, which was the biggest trade deal, which we covered earlier on in the telecast today, regarding $600 billion coming into the United States thanks to the European Union, in addition to $750 billion worth of energy packages. This takes away really that Russian Federation control over Germany, that willingly ridiculous agreement that somewhat sabotaged where the central power in Europe really stood on this. And the European Union President, Ursula von der Leyen, could not have been more forthcoming regarding all of this, stating that the United States has not been treated fairly in this and that she knew she was dealing with the master negotiator in all of these agreements. This really was the gold standard agreement to get to. Now, as I look over the 20 promises made, promises kept, the agenda for the Republican Party dating back to July of last year in Milwaukee, President Trump really has a couple of more items on the docket, and it's ultimately dealing with China. And he immediately did that with Secretary of Treasury Scott Bessent, informing him on those meetings via phone as he was on his way home from the United Kingdom to Joint Base Andrews in Maryland outside of Washington, D.C., but also to straighten out the big, beautiful cities that we have in this wonderful country. We saw in Cincinnati a gang mob just attack bystanders and people enjoying the summertime festivities. It should never happen in our amazing cities. They should be icons for the world to look towards, and President Trump wants to start there in Washington, D.C. to make all of that happen, to make America ultimately safe again, because some are fortunate enough to get up and they can leave. Others don't necessarily have that option, and a zip code should not prevent them from living free and fairly in this great nation of ours. So we'll see all of that develop, I'm sure, in 6+ months of really an extraordinary administration, moving at a breakneck pace. We are anticipating at the bottom of the hour now the Fed Chairman, too late, Jerome Powell, to speak at 2:30 Eastern. Perhaps he will bring down those rates, or at least work towards that. President Trump meeting with the chairman before the UK-Scottish trip, and they were surveying some of the new 5-year-old plan thus far of rebuilding the Federal Reserve. President Trump not too happy with it being over budget and behind schedule, but he was encouraging the chairman there to reduce those rates. So something that we will be looking at in the near future here. And as we get to that with Chairman Jerome Powell, President Trump finishing up that congressional bill signing there with Congressman Bost of Illinois and also Congressman Derek Van Orden of the 3rd District of Wisconsin. Thank you to our sponsors on the right side of history, Kalshi.com/RSBN. Who will President Trump pardon this year? Will Elon Musk create that third party, that American party? If he does, you can bet and trade on those very questions. In addition to the Los Angeles Dodgers, will they repeat the World Series, go back to back? Will they do that just as the Florida Panthers in hockey win that Stanley Cup back to back? You can trade on all these questions facing the United States domestically and internationally at Kalshi.com/RSBN. Thank you for your sponsorship on the right side of history. And Angel Paste, a classic here, one of our favorites that is Christian owned. They are out of Spring, Texas in the Houston Metroplex off of the Gulf of America. Angelpaste.com. Experience the miracle that truly makes a difference for dry skin, eczema, really makes your skin glowing. You saw me try it here on the network, and the vitamin B infused original miracle cream is a lifesaver. Non-GMO, no chemicals. There's an orange option that has vitamin C infused, also non-GMO, no chemical. And the natural mosquito repellent and facial sprays that can help you paint the town red. So experience the miracle today at angelpaste.com. Also, if you have any back taxes, we're getting to the Major League Baseball trade deadline tomorrow, July 31st. Also could be a good time to settle those back taxes from April 15th in case you missed them for whatever reason, whether you have a new business or, you got busy and then you forgot. It happens. Or if you overpaid, worth reaching out to our friends at Tax Network USA. The experts know a thing or two about this, as they want to make sure that you protect yourself from the IRS. Settle those back taxes today. Again, you can call 800-357-1415. That's 800-357-1415. Protect yourself from the IRS. Settle the back taxes today. TNUSA.com/RSBN. your go-to to protect yourself from a bloated bureaucracy, 80,000 new agents thanks to the auto pen. Make sure you don't get caught in the crosshairs of big government. TNUSA.com/RSBN. Thank you to Tax Network USA as we await too late Jerome Powell. It's time to bring down those Fed rates, especially with an economy that's booming, especially with success that is proven fact. And we saw the president in Scotland. We also saw Vice President J.D. Vance in his home state of Ohio, the Buckeye State, as they prepare for football season. They're also preparing for the great job numbers that will come into their fine state given the one big beautiful bill, as Vice President J.D. Vance toured that Canton steel plant with News 5 in Cleveland actually stating that the legislation allows companies to get tax breaks faster, which companies to get that tax break it has been allowed through the Trump administration, with the vice president saying it incentivizes United States production. The administration has also been threatening tariffs on foreign products for months now. And factory worker Justin Rice said this could help American labor. According to Justin, it really projects the hope and the optimism that really the administration is pushing. We make a lot of steel, not only for the military, but also for the automotive and oil industries. It's important to get steel from the states, not just from overseas. And the Canton Repository stating that local politicians react to the One Big Beautiful Bill Act as Vice President J.D. Vance visits Stark County, Ohio. And Stark County Commissioner Richard Regula praised policies on tax cuts and business incentives. He said the policy to limit tax on overtime will benefit people in Stark County. That's going to put extra money in people's pockets that they'll go and spend in Stark County. And I think you'll get that over time, as people that will want to work a little bit will be willing to do that because they're getting that overtime pay. So it's a win-win for everyone. Also, according to another commissioner in Stark County, Bill Smith, voiced support for tariff policies. He said it will benefit Metallus and other local manufacturers. He's put some business sense into this, stating that the president's getting these jobs back into this country is the biggest thing. Extending federal income tax cuts was necessary, and that those tax breaks were going to expire. Once you get used to that, how do you go back? It's kind of tough right now, especially given the high rates and coming off of inflation. Hello to late Jerome Powell. As things went up, wages are getting a little bit longer to get there. So it's American workers, especially the middle class, should be able to keep more of their hard-earned money. This is really just common sense and right-wing populism in action. This legislation prioritizes the American worker. State Senator Jane Timken commenting on this from Jackson, Ohio, especially the feelings in Stark County. It's almost a microcosm of the rest of the country, she said. We have a lot of industrial base. We have a lot of production that requires overtime, and especially a lot of people who rely on those very vital tips. Now, local news also commenting on Vice President Vance's visit to celebrate this amazing legislation. WKYC TV saying that Vice President J.D. Vance promoted Republicans' new sweeping tax and spending law at a steel plant in his home state on Monday, and that this will tell factory workers this new law would allow them to keep more of their paycheck in their pockets. And the vice president said that American workers should be able to keep more of their hard-earned money as U.S. companies continue to grow and manufacture steel right here in America. It's a national security issue, and they should not be taxed on tipped income. The Cleveland Plain Dealer stated that the vice president promotes the OBBB to Ohio steelworkers, saying that the vice president used a stop Monday in his native Ohio to try to sell steelworkers on the GOP's One Big Beautiful tax and spending bill. In some ways, my friends, it's so simple. It is so simple. You need a government that works for a change. And that's what the vice president told to a group at Metallus, the steel company in Canton that he visited. And whether it was WLWT TV or WOOIO, I'm almost spelling OHIO, as they say at the great Ohio State University, Vice President J.D. Vance visiting again in Ohio, the Canton Steel plant today. He touted several ways why he believes this administration will help people in Northeast Ohio, and countless radio programs, the Associated Press, Spectrum News, News Nation, the Daily Signal, all commenting on this extraordinary visit on Monday by Vice President J.D. Vance to his home state, the Buckeye State of Ohio, to really go into detail the reasons why the One Big Beautiful Bill Act signed into law by President Trump earlier this month. In fact, on the 4th of July, to celebrate freedom, especially after the successful strikes on the Iranian regime, that this would help middle-class Americans and those hard-working individuals who make a difference on a daily basis for all of America. And it's, again, a national security issue. We should not have the majority of our steel coming from abroad and coming from China. It's about Metallus and other great industrial manufacturers that actually supply our oil chains, our energy facilities, and the United States military. Should be made with United States steel. It just makes sense. It's common sense at the end of the day, as this president continues on a breakneck pace to make America great again. Now, the White House is not very happy with the Minnesota Star Tribune reporting that ICE wants to deport Wisconsin driver charged with being drunk, causing crash that killed 2 Minnesota teens. Now, this Wisconsin driver is an illegal immigrant from Honduras who drove drunk on revoked license and with open booze containers, doing the wrong way on the highway, killing 2 innocent teenagers from Minnesota. And yes, the Trump administration wants to deport her. It's common sense. Why are media outlets like the Star Tribune so obsessed with running cover for criminal illegal immigrants, putting our communities at risk? In recent months, this newspaper has defended criminal illegal immigrant sex offenders whose photos and sex convictions were flaunted online, sympathized with criminal illegals convicted of sex crimes, including sexual abuse of a minor, and as suggested citizens pay the price for deporting dangerous criminals out of our communities. Of course, they're taking their cues from a serious illegal immigrant defender, none other than Minnesota's Governor Tim Walz and the failed vice presidential candidate for pro-sanctuary citizens and politicians who would rather see killers, rapists, and gangbangers left on the streets of America. We remember that him and his wife were opening their windows, smelling the tire fires that were burning in the Summer of Love in Minneapolis post the George Floyd BLM riots. Now, meanwhile, the Trump administration will keep doing what it's doing to bring safety to American streets and to make American cities beautiful once again. Because many of us have had to relocate throughout this great United States for better work opportunities, better American dreams to flourish because of the lockdowns that took place during that time. I mean, it amazed me to watch in my own home state of Illinois, where the person who was telling us that we should not be in groups of people, whether at church, at the grocery store, dining halls, to supper clubs, restaurants, fitness centers, wherever it might have been, Jelly Bean Pritzker, was, I thought, the person who should not be around groups of people either with a mask on, given that he is not exactly in a pristine health condition. Well, no, he went out there with radical activists, locked arms in arms, creating a chaos and taking a playbook right out of Rahm Emanuel's set of rules. Don't let a crisis go unchecked. Don't let a crisis go to waste. And he was out there. That didn't make a lot of sense in 2020 as they locked down Chicago and the state of Illinois and many other blue states and cities that you saw there, that you could not have the freedom of mobilization, transportation, the freedom to simply go and make a living, as we saw during the pandemic. There are bureaucrats throughout all levels of government, whether it be federal, state, or local. I think we've shown that here on the network, and we will continue to call that out on the right side, the correct side of history, so that you can ultimately make up that decision and make up your mind for yourself as this administration continues to work overtime for the American people. You know, it's crazy because there's that COVID variant that's still out there. In fact, I was supposed to see a friend a couple weekends ago. They came into contact with COVID. I was surprised by it, but the best way to make sure you protect yourself from any bacterial or viral infection, it's allfamilypharmacy.com/RSBN. You have ivermectin, antibiotics, hydrochloroquine, NAD+, and much, much more, from methylene blue to mebendazole. If you use code RSBN10, you'll get 10% off right now. And the generous co-owner, Michael Kunzler, of this fine organization, very familiar with online pharmacies. They're really the leader in all of this. If you look at the PBMs and the advantage they've taken as insurance companies now will own pharmaceutical outlets, a little bit of double dipping there. And actually, the person I mentioned seems to be in bipartisan support of what President Trump is doing to bring down those costs of prescription drugs. In fact, signing legislation in Illinois that is Jelly Bean Pritzker to also address this PBM issue, because it really is bipartisan. It really is not right or left. The cost of these medications much less outside of the United States of America. Why is that? It's because of the lobbyists. It's because of big pharmaceutical practices. Allfamilypharmacy.com/RSBN does not dive into the red tape. They are anti-bureaucratic. They are simply doctors and nurses, pharmacists, professionals who want to give you that life-saving medication. So it's $216 on the East Coast. If you order 24 hours from now, it will be right at your doorstep with code RSBN10. So you get the 10% off. Michael Kunzler throws another 25% off. It's 35% off in savings for life-saving medication that you should have in your medicine cabinet, whether it's those terrible storms in Texas, the Guadalupe River. We had a tsunami, that terrible 8.7 magnitude earthquake in Japan. It's affecting Russia. It's affecting Alaska, the Aleutian Islands, even up to Anchorage, and warnings early this morning along our Golden Coast of Washington, Oregon, and California. So what are you to do when the storms in life hit, figuratively or literally speaking, and the pharmacy down the street is closed? Or simply the pharmacy, as mentioned before, because of the PBM problem, don't want you to have this life-saving medication. allfamilypharmacy.com/RSBN, watching out for you, the American people. You know what's great about it as well? You could take these medications on your summer vacation, emergency medical kits as well. Easy to fit, whether you're traveling by plane, train, or automobile. Scan the QR code now, allfamilypharmacy.com/RSBN. No red tape, no bureaucracy, no insurance, no problem. The meds you trust delivered right to your door with a prescription. allfamilypharmacy.com/RSBN. Thank you for your sponsorship on the right side of history as we await the Fed Chair Jerome Powell to speak at the bottom of the hour here in regards to what was taking place over the last week. President Trump had met with him, surveying the new building that is sadly over budget. It's behind on time, and President Trump has named 3 people he thinks would be great replacements for the soon-to-be retiring too late Jerome Powell, one being Senator Tim Scott of the Palmetto State, also Governor Ron DeSantis of the Free State of Florida, and you also have the outstanding and fantastic Kristi Noem at the Department of Homeland Security. But President Trump said there's a problem. They all want to stay in their positions right now. So we'll see what happens with all of that, as that will be breaking news at the bottom of the hour. In case you missed it, President Trump on an extraordinary tour of Scotland, a native land of his mother, who really enjoyed it. And he spoke to that during the opening of Trump International in Scotland, right after last week's trade deals. Japan, $550 billion of investments coming into the United States and also helping the markets there in Japan. Thailand, also the Philippines. They'll have a 19% threshold, a tariff tax rate for them to buy into our markets. We will, in turn, reciprocally, not have to deal with that. 0 for us. So a great way for both countries to access one another's goods and minerals moving forward. Also, in between some golf at Turnberry and meetings with the European Union President, the UK Prime Minister, and also the First Minister of Scotland, President Trump able to get on the phone with Cambodia and Thailand and end a conflict they had there. And he said, look, Cambodia wants to trade with us. We won't even talk about it unless peace is met. And President Trump said, with Thailand, we just hit that trade deal. We will back out if you don't stop. And just like Pakistan and India, success happening there with peace, just like Israel and Gaza and Iran, you see peace, this peace through strength president with the Democratic Republic of the Congo and the Republic of Rwanda finding peace after 30 years and 80 million casualties in tribal warfare. It was President Trump's involvement that brought peace to the African continent. And soon, Russia, as President Trump announced yesterday on the way back home via Air Force One from Scotland to Joint Base Andrews, the Russians now have 10 days. He moved up the dates to settle a peace and talk that negotiation. So the ball is in Vladimir Putin's court, and Vladimir Zelensky clearly does not have the cards still to stop this stalemate, but President Trump committed to selling those Patriot missiles to Ukraine via Europe and NATO, purchasing them, and NATO Secretary General Mark Rutte saying, I understand why the president wants to do that, to have those sales happen, and in turn, it will ultimately likely bring peace. So we'll keep you on that immediately as we have a recap video of Scotland and President Trump's successes over the last few days. What a great trip to beautiful Scotland. And although it was a foreign nation, President Trump taking UK Prime Minister Keir Starmer to Turnberry and Aberdeen via Air Force One, Marine One as well, because he was on his private properties. So does that make President Trump a lord? According to Scottish common law, I believe if you own land there, you're therefore a lord. So throw that idea out there. Maybe Lord President Trump. Perhaps he'll be knighted. We know that he's going to meet with the King, His Majesty, King Charles, and the Queen of England at an upcoming trip, which is unprecedented as well, according to UK Prime Minister Keir Starmer, that you're fortunate to get one state dinner with His Majesty, the King, but now to have a follow-up after his mother, the late, great Queen Elizabeth II, hosting President Trump in the first term. So it shows you the binds and the connections that our two great nations have and the influence of English common law over what became this constitutional republic known as the United States of America. Thank you to our sponsors on the right side of history. You know, you might have debt, and pdsdebt.com/RSBN will get you that free assessment. Break free from debt starting today, because we know the system isn't broken, it's simply rigged. And with coming off of inflation, you might have a couple of those cards that are way in debt, or even a mortgage, or just difficulty paying on those timely bills. So no credit card score is required for this. See if you qualify in roughly 30 seconds. There's no minimum credit score required, as I mentioned. And this wonderful business boasts a 5-star rating with the Better Business Bureau. Also, according to Trustpilot, it is the place to go to do business. Why? Because it's helped hundreds of thousands of people to get out of debt. Big banks profit when you're desperate. The creditors win when you lose, but you don't have to play their game. pdsdebt.com/RSBN will help you take back control and break the debt that could be breaking your back and free you from credit card debt and other kind of high interest traps. It's time to fight for your money, for your future. It's time to fight for them both, in fact. And PDS Debt goes beyond the numbers to understand your unique financial situation and craft a personalized plan designed for you. So pdsdebt.com/RSBN, truly your go-to for health and wealth freedom, because it's about getting a good night's sleep, and you can only do that by being debt-free. But there's also mypillow.com. tvOS.com/RSBN, where you can truly get that good night's sleep and rest your head well. And thank God every day that you're living in the land of the free. With the My Cross, you could save 50% off. Also, My Pillow bed sheets going for $24.98, all sizes, all colors. How about the multi-use My Pillow 2.0 under $10? Better than a lunch deal out there. 800-836-7566. Call today. Don't delay. Support Mike Lindell and Right Side Broadcasting Network by shopping now at mypillow.com/RSBN, saving with code RSBN. If you like what you see here at the network, feel free to donate as well with those extra dollars now that one big beautiful bill passed. And the average family of four will see around that $10,900 mark of more of their earned income as a result of this outstanding legislation and the president's signature. So support us here at Right Side Broadcasting Network for unbridled access to your 47th president, your 50th vice president, the 119th Congress. rsbnetwork.com/donate or text RSBN to 801-801. You can also mail a check-in if you like the old school way of doing things. 1550 Opelika Road, Suite 6. That's Box 344, Auburn, Alabama 36830. Once again, 1550 Opelika Road, Suite 6, Box 344. The loveliest village on the plains, Auburn, Alabama 36830. Thank you for your support of the right side of history, the correct side of history, and the new media that's working overtime as a live desk for you. And in a few moments, we will get the Fed Chair, Jerome Powell, to speak at 2:30 Eastern Time. And too late, Jerome, we'll see what he has to say. Sometimes long-winded, somewhat academic, but someone who is completely on the opposite side of where America is seemingly going right now, with a bustling economy, with inflation going down, with egg prices, gas prices, all going in the correct direction for American consumers. And we saw since July of 2021, gas prices have not been so low on a national average. More and more people traveling this summer by plane, train, and automobile to enjoy time with family and friends in this great nation of ours. So we'll see. Maybe he's convinced now, after meeting with President Trump, to bring down those Fed rates, something so crucial to do, because even if you do that by 0.5%, you'll give people the opportunity to perhaps purchase their first home and then hopefully live out that American dream as they'd like to pursue happiness, as guaranteed by our founding documents. You need shelter over your head, a place to stake your claim, and private property being the hallmark of a free society, as well as free transportation and mobilization from state to state. Something, again, we saw violated during the COVID-19 pandemic of 2020. So we'll see what this old bureaucrat has to say about things as we are smiling ear to ear 6+ months into the Trump administration, and G7, an amazing trip. NATO, extraordinary as well, with 5% GDP coming and being agreed to by all member nations for the transatlantic security of the United States and the European Union. Well, Spain held out, but President Trump said, we'll make them pay peacefully and patriotically, of course, with their currency, with a trade deal or whatever it might be. They claim that with their social safety net that they cannot afford that, but the other nations could. In turn, President Trump selling the Patriot missiles to NATO via the European Union to protect Ukraine in the promises made but broken by Russian President Vladimir Putin. And we hope here at the network that Russia and Ukraine come to peace. Over 1 million people dying in the conflict, civilian and military. In fact, over 1 million Russians as a result. Two beautiful cultures, the Ukrainians and the Russians, and they're much like traditional Americans. They just happen to have two terrible leaders who have one thing in common, the same name, Vladimir. But Putin and Zelensky are two warmonger maniacs. And I think it's become very clear that they have been on the wrong side of history over the course of the last few years. But bottom line is, if the auto pen wasn't in office, if the Barack Hussein Obama Russia hoax, Crossfire Hurricane Steele dossier perpetuating comrades did not try to usurp the authority of a duly elected constitutional president of the United States, we would not have to be dealing with this cleanup on aisle 3, the mess that they left Donald Trump to fix. And that's my question. Would there be anyone else for such a time as this to really move at this speed with this amazing team around him in order to save the country and make America great again? I don't think there's really anyone out there that could do that. And you have to look to not only the midterms in 2026 in order to ensure that President Trump is not impeached, not because he did anything wrong, but because you have a demon rat party led by No-Hip Sakim who wants to do that. Let's take it there live to Washington, D.C. Too late, Jerome Powell.
Good afternoon. My colleagues and I remain squarely focused on achieving our dual mandate goals of maximum employment and stable prices for the benefit of the American people. Despite elevated uncertainty, the economy is in a solid position. The unemployment rate remains low, and the labor market is at or near maximum employment. Inflation has been running somewhat above our 2% longer run objective. In support of our goals, today the Federal Open Market Committee decided to leave our policy interest rate unchanged. We believe that the current stance of monetary policy leaves us well positioned to respond in a timely way to potential economic developments. I will have more to say about monetary policy after briefly reviewing economic developments. Recent indicators suggest that growth of economic activity has moderated. GDP rose at a 1.2% pace in the first half of this year, down from 2.5% last year. Although the increase in the second quarter was stronger at 3%, focusing on the first half of the year helps smooth through the volatility in the quarterly figures related to the unusual swings in net exports. The moderation in growth largely reflects a slowdown in consumer spending. In contrast, business investment in equipment and intangibles picked up from last year's pace. Activity in the housing sector remains weak. In the labor market, conditions have remained solid. Payroll job gains averaged 150,000 per month over the past 3 months. The unemployment rate at 4.1% remains low and has stayed in a narrow range over the past year. Wage growth has continued to moderate while still outpacing inflation. Overall, a wide set of indicators suggests that conditions in the labor market are broadly in balance and consistent with maximum employment. Inflation has eased significantly from its highs in mid-2022, but remains somewhat elevated relative to our 2% longer run goal. Estimates based on the Consumer Price Index and other data indicate that total PCE prices rose 2.5% over the 12 months ending in June, and that, excluding the volatile food and energy categories, core PCE prices rose 2.7%. These readings are little changed from the beginning of the year, although the underlying composition of price changes has shifted. Services inflation has continued to ease, while increased tariffs are pushing up prices in some categories of goods. Near-term measures of inflation expectations have moved up on balance over the course of this year on news about tariffs, as reflected in both market-based and survey-based measures. Beyond the next year or so, however, most measures of longer-term expectations remain consistent with our 2% inflation goal. Our monetary policy actions are guided by our dual mandate to promote maximum employment and stable prices for the American people. At today's meeting, the committee decided to maintain the target range for the federal funds rate at 4.25% to 4.5%, and to continue reducing the size of our balance sheet. We will continue to determine the appropriate stance of monetary policy based on the incoming data, the evolving outlook, and the balance of risks. Changes to government policies continue to evolve, and their effects on the economy remain uncertain. Higher tariffs have begun to show through more clearly to prices of some goods, but their overall effects on economic activity and inflation remain to be seen. A reasonable base case is that the effects on inflation could be short-lived, reflecting a one-time shift in the price level. But it is also possible that the inflationary effects could instead be more persistent, and that is a risk to be assessed and managed. Our obligation is to keep longer-term inflation's inflation expectations well anchored and to prevent a one-time increase in the price level from becoming an ongoing inflation problem. For the time being, we're well positioned to learn more about the likely course of the economy and the evolving balance of risks before adjusting our policy stance. We see our current policy stance as appropriate to guard against inflation risks. We're also attentive to risks on the employment side of our mandate. In coming months, we will receive a good amount of data that will help inform our assessment of the balance of risks and the appropriate setting of the federal funds rate. At this meeting, the committee continued its discussions as part of our 5-year review of our monetary policy framework. We focused on potential revisions to our statement on longer-run goals and monetary policy strategy, and are on track to wrap up any modifications by late summer. The Fed has been assigned 2 goals for monetary policy: maximum employment and stable prices. We remain committed to supporting maximum employment, bringing inflation sustainably to our 2% goal, and keeping longer-term inflation expectations well anchored. Our success in delivering on these goals matters to all Americans. We understand that our actions affect communities, families, and businesses across the country. Everything we do is in service to our public mission. We at the Fed will do everything we can to achieve our maximum employment and price stability goals. Thank you. I look forward to your questions.
Thanks, Chair Powell. There's a lot of lean in the markets, and not to mention out of the administration for a rate cut now in September. Is that expectation unrealistic at this point?
So, as you know, today we decided to leave our policy rate where it's been, where I would characterize as modestly restrictive. Inflation is running a bit above 2%, as I mentioned, even excluding tariff effects. The labor market's solid, historically low unemployment. Financial conditions are accommodative, and the economy is not performing as though restrictive policy were holding it back inappropriately. So it seems to me and to almost the whole committee that the economy is not performing as though restrictive policy is holding it back inappropriately, and modestly restrictive policy seems appropriate. All that said, there's also downside risk to the labor market. In coming months, we'll receive a good amount of data that will help inform our assessment of the balance of risks and the appropriate setting of the federal funds rate.
So, just to follow up, by coming months, does that include the possibility you'll be getting essentially 2 rounds of jobs and inflation data between now and the September meeting? Is that potentially adequate to make a decision to lower rates at that point?
So you're right. We do have, this is an intermeeting period when we'll get 2 full rounds of employment and inflation data before the time of the September meeting. We have made no decisions about September. We don't do that in advance. We'll be taking that information into consideration and all the other information we get as we make our decision at the September meeting.
Steve.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. You took out the word or the notion that uncertainty has diminished from this statement. Does that mean uncertainty has increased? And I'm just wondering, the administration has struck several deals with large trading partners where it seems like we now know what the rate is going to be. Does knowing that rate add to your certainty to change policy, or do you need to wait to see the economic effects?
So essentially, the statement in our statement about uncertainty reflects what's gone on since the last meeting. So, at the time of the last meeting, uncertainty had moved down a little bit, but it was more or less even this time. So we took out, had diminished because it didn't diminish further. So there's not really much in that. And then your second question is, say again.
There have been several deals that have been struck, and now we seem to have an idea of what the tariff rates are going to be with some of our large trading partners. Does that not add to the kind of certainty you might need, or is it you're waiting for the economic effects to show themselves?
No, I think we're still, you're right. It's been a very dynamic time for these trade negotiations, and lots and lots of events in the intermeeting period, but we're still a ways away from seeing where things settle down. We are clearly getting more and more information, and I think at this point, people's estimates, our estimates, outside estimates of the likely effective level of tariffs is not moving around that much at this point. But at the same time, there are many uncertainties left to resolve. So yes, we are learning more and more. It doesn't feel like we're very close to the end of that process, and that's not for us to judge. But it feels like there's much more to come, as well, looking ahead.
Hi, Mr. Chairman. Neil Irwin with Axios. This morning we got a GDP report in which final domestic private purchases decelerated, slowest pace since 22. There was a weakness in the interest-sensitive sectors and residential investment, commercial structures. Are those not signs that monetary policy is a little too restrictive right now, given current economic conditions?
So the GDP and PDFP numbers came in pretty much right where we expected them to come in. You got to look at the whole picture. So certainly, as I mentioned in my opening remarks, economic activity data, GDP, private domestic final purchases, which we think is a narrower but better signal for future, for where the economy is going, has come down to a little better than 1%, 1.2%, I think, in the case of GDP for the first half, whereas it was 2.5% last year. So that has certainly come down. But if you look at the labor market, what you see is, by many statistics, the labor market is kind of still in balance. It's things like quits, job openings, and let alone the unemployment rate. They're all by many measures, very similar to where they were a year ago. So you do not see weakening in the labor market. You do see a slowing in job creation, but also a slowing in the supply of workers. So you've got a labor market that's in balance, albeit partially because both demand and supply for workers is coming down at the same pace, and that's why the unemployment rate has remained roughly stable, which is why I said we do see downside risk in the labor market. I mean, our two mandate variables, right, are inflation and maximum employment, stable prices and maximum employment, not so much growth. So the labor market looks solid. Inflation is above target, and even if you look through the tariff effects, we think it's still a bit above target, and that's why our stance is where it is. But as I mentioned, downside risks to the labor market are certainly apparent.
So on labor, given the fluid labor supply situation, is there a number for this jobs report we get on Friday that would look to you like equilibrium job growth?
The main number you have to look at now is the unemployment rate, because it's true that the demand for workers in the form of, let's call it, just say payroll jobs, that number has come down, but so has the break-even number, kind of in tandem. So, as long as that puts the labor market in balance, the fact that it's getting into balance due to declines in both supply and demand, though, I think it is suggestive of downside risk. So we of course, will be watching that carefully.
Thank you. Colby Smith with the New York Times. Two of your colleagues called for a quarter-point cut today, and I'm wondering what aspects of their argument were most compelling to you and how you're weighing their views against those on the committee who, as of the June forecast, were in the camp of the Fed holding interest rates steady for the remainder of the year. And just in terms of the June SEP in particular, is that still the best representation of where the core of the committee is?
So on the dissents, what you want from everybody and also from a dissenter is a clear explanation of what your thinking is and what are the arguments you're making, and we had that today. So I think basically this was quite a good meeting all around the table where people were thought carefully about this and put their positions out there. As I mentioned, the sort of the majority of the committee was of the view that inflation's a bit above target, maximum employment is at target. That calls for modestly restrictive, in my way of thinking, modestly restrictive stance of policy for now. But we had two dissenters who I think, you want that clear thinking and expression of your thinking, and we certainly had that today, I think all around the table. In terms of, you asked about the June SEP, I wouldn't, that you're right, that's what it says, and that may well, I couldn't point to it 6 weeks later as expressing people's thought. You really can't do that. We don't run an SEP, and I don't like to substitute in my own estimate of what the SEP might be. We don't have one. So I'll just say that, we haven't made any decisions about September. We'll be monitoring all the incoming data and asking ourselves whether the federal funds rate is in the right place.
And just on the point about policy being only modestly restrictive, does that mean that there's actually not much scope to reduce rates once the conditions for a cut are met, barring a significant weakening of the labor market?
So let me say, my own estimate is modestly restrictive, and there are a range of views of what the neutral rate is at this moment for our economy, and so others may say it's more restrictive or less restrictive even. We're going to be at some point when we return to moving toward a more neutral stance, we'll be making that judgment as we go. I don't think we have a preset course. It's not so mechanical as saying, we've derived with great confidence the neutral rate and that is our destination, because really we understand that no one actually knows what the neutral rate is. We know it by its works, and that will be how the way the economy reacts over time to slightly looser policy.
Nick Timmeros, The Wall Street Journal. Chair Powell, my question is about what have you learned over the last few months about the inflation generating and price pass-through process? And just to drill down, the June CPI report showed evidence of tariff-induced goods inflation. Now, the tariff landscape is only starting to be settled with some of these more recent deals. Given the lags between when tariffs are announced and when they show up in goods prices, is 2 months a long enough horizon to evaluate the impact and be confident that tariffs aren't impacting the broader inflation process?
I think you have to think of this as still quite early days. And so I think what we're seeing now is substantial amounts of tariff revenue being collected on the order of $30 billion a month, which is substantially higher than before. And the evidence seems to be mostly not paid only to a small extent through exporters lowering their price, and companies or retailers, sort of people who are upstream, institutions that are upstream from the consumer, are paying most of this for now. It's starting to show up in consumer prices, as you know, in the June report. We expect to see more of that. And we know from surveys that companies feel that they have every intention of putting this through to the consumer, but the truth is they may not be able to in many cases. So I think we're just going to have to watch and learn empirically how much of this and over what period of time. I think we've learned that the process will probably be slower than expected at the beginning, but we never expected it to be fast. And we think we have a long way to go to really understand exactly how it will be. So that's how we're thinking of it right now.
So if I could follow up, is the reticence to look through core goods inflation being driven by the judgment that during the pandemic expectations proved more adaptive than anyone at the Fed expected? Is it being driven by uncertainty over how restrictive policy is?
You could argue we are a bit looking through goods inflation by not raising rates. We haven't reacted to new inflation, but I mean I wouldn't insist upon that. But I don't think I think the base case, as I said, a reasonable base case is that these are one-time price effects. Of course, in the end, there will not be. This will not turn out to be inflation, because we'll make sure that it's not. We will, through our tools, make sure that this does not move from being a one-time price increase to serious inflation. We want to do that efficiently, though, and that means we want to do it. If you move too soon, you wind up maybe not getting inflation all the way fixed, and you have to come back. That's inefficient. If you move too late, you might do unnecessary damage to the labor market. So there won't be, in the end, a big inflationary problem. What we're trying to do is accomplish that in a way that is efficient. But in the end, there should be no doubt that we will do what we need to do to keep inflation under control. Ideally, we do it efficiently.
Michael McKee from Bloomberg Television and Radio. The one big bill, leaving aside the adjectives, do you expect it to add stimulus to the economy in 2026? And would that be an argument for remaining on hold or cutting back on the number of rate cuts you would expect for next year?
So, of course, let me just ritual disclaimer that we don't express any judgments or anything like that on fiscal legislation or other legislation for that matter. But I would say when you think that, the biggest part of the bill was making permanent existing law on taxes, I don't think we see it as particularly stimulative. There should be some stimulative effect, but it shouldn't be significant over the next couple of years.
And to follow up, what do you, well, I don't want to put this in terms of you and the president, so let me ask it this way. Do you have concerns about the cost to the government of keeping rates elevated for longer in terms of interest rate charges?
Yeah, no, that's, we have a mandate, and that's maximum employment and price stability. And it is, it's not something we do to consider the cost to the government of our rate changes. We have to be able to look at the goal variables Congress has given us, use the tools they've given us to achieve those goals, and that's what we do. We don't consider the fiscal needs of the federal government. No advanced economy central bank does that, and it wouldn't be good for, if we did do that, it would be good neither for our credibility nor for the credibility of U.S. fiscal policy. So it's just not something we take into consideration.
Hi, Victoria Guido with Politico. When it comes to the renovations of the Federal Reserve's headquarters that the administration has been looking into, do you see their interest in that issue as being directly tied to the president's push to get you to lower interest rates?
Not for me to say. I will say we had a nice visit with the president. It was an honor to host him. It's not something that happens very often at the Federal Reserve to have the president come over, let alone to visit a building. But it was a good visit.
Are there any aspects of the project that they've raised that you see as making you reconsider any aspects of the project?
So, this project was hatched and conceived almost a decade ago now, and we went through the very long process of clearing it through historic preservation at the National Capital Planning Commission, and a lot of back and forth there. It was very constructive. We started out to do the work, and we're very well along on that work, and I was quite pleased to have the president say multiple times that what he really wanted to see was us getting this construction completed as soon as possible. That is our focus, and that's what we're going to do.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. Andrew Ackerman with the Washington Post. What message do you take from the fact that inflation hit 2.1% last September and has bounced higher since? Why do you think financial conditions are restrictive and a neutral rate's below 4% when inflation has stopped falling for almost a year?
So inflation, when you talk about these 12-month inflation measures, you're always battling residual seasonality. So we'll have, for example, 2 months of high inflation sometimes early in the year, and then inflation turns lower, and a lot of that may just be an artifact. So that's why we look at the 12-month numbers. I think inflation is most of the way back to 2%. There are things like the catch-up inflation. So, for example, all the insurance costs that they're only now going through inflation, but they actually reflect inflationary pressures from 2-3 years ago. So that's got to go through. In addition, now we have 3 or 4 tenths of inflation in core inflation from tariffs. So, and we can't really separate that out. We're not going to have a separate kind of inflation that isn't the tariffs. We're always going to be dealing with all of inflation. But the composition, as I mentioned, has really changed. And if you go back to the last couple of years, it was all about services inflation, which was being very sticky. Now services inflation is coming down nicely. Goods inflation was well behaved before, and now goods inflation is going up. So the story has really changed. That's partially because of tariffs. It's also partially because we had restrictive policy in place, and we've seen that the result of that gradually work its way through the services economy.
Okay. The other thing I wanted to ask is, are you comfortable that BLS can continue performing their mission effectively if they take an 8% reduction in headcount and authorized spending as the administration has proposed?
I'm not going to comment on the administration's proposal. I do think, as I've said, I think that we're getting the data that we need to do our jobs, and I think it's really important that good data helps not just the Fed, it helps the government, but it also helps the private sector. People in the economy they use this data a lot too. So it's quite important for our economy and certainly for the Fed's work and other government agencies' work that we continue to get better at data. That's what we've been doing for 100 years. We've been getting better and better and better. It's very hard to accurately capture in real time the output of a $20+ trillion economy. And the United States has been a leader in that for 100 years, and we really need to continue that, in my view.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Edward Lawrence from Fox Business. How concerned are you with the data that we're coming in, showing no significant upward trend in inflation over the past 6 months, that the wait-and-see approach for inflation is actually giving companies cover to raise prices?
How concerned am I that say that again?
The wait-and-see approach is giving...
The wait-and-see approach, what do you mean by that?
For cutting rates. You're waiting to see if the tariffs will affect inflation. So it's a wait-and-see approach.
Well, so that's where policy's restrictive. When we start cutting, it'll go toward neutral.
Okay. This delay, though, where you're saying there's a one-time price increase for tariffs, which possibly could lead into bigger inflation or more inflation. Is that giving companies cover, though, to raise prices?
Well, what may be giving, it's not our policy stance, what may be giving some companies will certainly be taking advantage of the fact of the tariffs and all of the discussion of how they're going to, companies will raise prices when and as they can. And you saw it famously in the first administration of President Trump during those tariffs. Washing machines were tariffed, but dryers weren't. But what do you know? The price of dryers went up too, just like washing machines. So companies will often they'll cross the street in a group, if you know what I mean. That'll happen. We don't see a lot of that. I mean, what we see now is basically the very beginnings of whatever the effects turn out to be on goods inflation. And I'll say again, they may be less than people estimate or more than people estimate. They're not going to be zero. Consumers will pay some of this. Businesses will pay some of this. Retailers will pay some of this. But we're just going to have to see it through.
And just to follow, if I could, some additional tariffs have been in place since February, and things really haven't broken yet with the economy. So how do you justify to somebody who's looking for a house, who's facing a 7% mortgage and maybe can't afford those rates? How do you justify that?
Well, so the housing is a special case, right? We don't set mortgage rates at the Fed, right? We set an overnight rate, and the rates that go into mortgages are longer-term rates, like Treasury rates. It might be 30-year rates. It might be shorter than that, but it's not the overnight Fed's rate. It's not that we don't have any effect. We do have an effect, but we're not the main effect. There are other things going on in the housing sector, and one of those is just there's kind of a long-term housing shortage that we have. We haven't built enough housing. This is not something the Fed can help with, and that'll be the case even after things normalize. So I think the best thing that we can do for housing is to have 2% inflation and maximum employment, and that's what we can contribute to housing. There are lots of other jobs to do for the private sector and Congress, but that's what we're trying to get to. I mean, we've made a lot of progress toward that. We have a very good labor market right now. Inflation, we were very close to 2%. We're seeing some goods inflation move us away, but so far not very far away.
Hi, Chair Powell. Thank you. Well, can you give us a little more about what kind of economic data does the Fed need to see before you'll be ready to cut? I mean, do you need inflation back nearly to target? Are there other things in the pricing that you look for? Do you need to see weakening in the job market? What kind of things are you looking for?
I mean, ultimately, it could be any of those things, right? But if you saw that the risks to the two goals were moving into balance, if they were fully in balance, that would imply that you should move toward a more neutral stance of policy. This is the special situation we're in, which is we have two-sided risk to both of our goals. When we paused, inflation was above target and the labor market was pretty good. So that was a time when policy was restrictive when we paused. And to be restrictive is to be supporting a return to our inflation target, right? So as the two targets get back into balance, you would think you'd move in a way closer to neutral, and that the next steps that we take are likely to be in that direction. What will it take? It'll be the totality of the evidence. As I mentioned, there's quite a lot of data coming in, which before the next meeting. Will it be dispositive of that? It's really hard to say. We don't make those decisions right now, so we'll have to see.
Well, I guess just in terms of inflation, though, for example, like some people would point to if it remains only in goods and it doesn't bleed over to services, then maybe that's evidence that the tariff effect is going to be a temporary one-time thing. Is that kind of thing affect your thinking, or do you just need to see the number come down closer to 2?
We'll look at everything. It's, as I mentioned, a pretty reasonable base case is that this will be a one-time price increase. And in the end, we'll make sure that that's the case. We're just trying to do that efficiently. And efficiently means getting the timing right so we don't, again, if we cut rates too soon, maybe we didn't finish the job with inflation. History is dotted with examples of that. If you cut too late, then maybe you're doing unnecessary damage to the labor market. So we're trying to get that timing right, and that's effectively what we're doing.
Claire Jones, Financial Times. Just a question on the dollar. We've seen it decline quite heavily this year. I was wondering if there's been any discussion about that at the meetings and to what degree that may be complicating your attempts to get inflation back to target. Thank you.
This goes back to the division of labor between the Fed and the Treasury, as you I'm sure know, and the Treasury only speaks to the dollar. It's not something that's been a topic of major discussion at all at the Fed. I won't say it doesn't come up. If the transcripts, when they come out in a few years, they'll probably reflect some mentions of the dollar, but it would never be a major focus.
And just to follow on, if I may, to Andrew's question, I think the amount of imputed data in CPI now is up to 35%. I mean, is there any discussion of that as well? Is there any consideration of looking at alternative measures, data scraping and so on, in order to just ensure you've got a good read on what's happening to prices in the U.S. economy? Thank you.
We're monitoring the situation. We do, of course, I mean, as you know, during the pandemic, we looked at a whole lot of new kinds of data. People are looking at big data sets that you can get from all sorts of places, and we do all of that. But at the same, we really need the government data. Really is the gold standard in data, and we need it to be, to be good and be able to rely on it. And we're not going to be able to substitute for that, but if we have to make do with what we have. But I certainly hope that we get what we need.
Jay O'Brien.
Hi, Mr. Chairman. Jay O'Brien, ABC News. President Trump has obviously invoked your name a lot. He has personally pressured you. Are you concerned the way that conduct might impact the Fed's independence going forward?
I'll just say that, I think that having an independent central bank has been an institutional arrangement that has served the public well. And as long as it serves the public well, it should continue and be respected. If it didn't serve the public well, then it wouldn't be something that we should just automatically defend. But what it gives us, and other central banks, what it gives you is the ability to make these very challenging decisions that in ways that are focused on the data and the evolving outlook, the balance of risks, and all the things we talk about, and not political factors. And so governments all over the advanced economy world have chosen to put a little bit of distance between direct political control of those decisions and the decision makers. So if you were not to have that, there would be a great temptation, of course, to use interest rates to affect elections, for example. And that's something that we don't want to do. So I think that's pretty widely understood. Certainly it is in Congress. And I think it's very important. I'll just say that.
Maria Eloisa.
Afternoon, Sir Powell. Maria Eloisa Capurro from Bloomberg News. You mentioned a slowdown in consumer spending, and I wanted to see if you could walk us through what was the discussion with the committee around that. We've seen delinquency rates rising for upper income households. How do you see that evolving in the next few months, and how much of a vulnerability that is for the economy going forward?
Consumer spending had been very, very strong for the last couple of years, and had repeatedly, forecasters, not just us, had been forecasting it would slow down, and now maybe it finally has. So I would say, if you talk to credit card companies, for example, they will tell you that the consumer's in solid shape and that spending is at a healthy level. It's not growing rapidly, but it's at a healthy level, and delinquencies are not a problem. You mentioned high-end delinquencies. I don't know what to make of that. I read the same thing, but so generally, if you look at the banks, and when the banks talk about in their earnings calls, the performance of credit has been good. So essentially, you have a consumer that's in good shape and is spending, not at a rapid rate, but it's true, and it was again right in line with what we expected. The GDP data that we got this week. And I think it's still a little bit difficult to interpret because you have these massive swings in net exports, which may also be affecting. Some of that can be can affect consumer spending as well. Look, it's one of the data points that we pay most careful attention to, and there's no question that it's slowed. And we're watching it closely, but we also watch the labor market and the performance of inflation. Those are our two variables that we're assigned to maximize.
And just to follow up on what my colleagues were asking about this sense, Governor Waller said that the labor market is on edge, and he was pointing to weaknesses on the private sector. I was wondering, you've said that the main number to look at is the unemployment number overall, but what was the discussion about the state of the private jobs market?
So I'm not going to talk about any individual's, any individual's comments. I wouldn't do that. But I think what we know is that private sector job creation, certainly in the last report we'll see on Friday, but had come down a bit. And if you take the QCEW adjustment seriously, which it may be even lower, maybe close to zero. But the unemployment rate was still low. So what that's telling you is that demand for workers is slowing, but so is the supply. So it's in balance. Oddly enough, you've got a very low unemployment rate, and it's kind of been there for a year as job creation has moved down. But also we know that because of immigration policy, really, the flow into our labor forces is just a great deal slower, and those two things have slowed more or less in tandem. If you look at things like I mentioned, quits, look at wages. Wages are gradually cooling. Look at vacancies to unemployment. Those things have been pretty stable they haven't really moved a lot in a full year. So I think if you take the totality of the labor market data, you've got a solid labor market. But I think you have to see that there are downside risks. You don't see weakening in the labor market, but I think you've got downside risks in a world where unemployment's being held down because both demand and supply are declining. I think it's worth paying close attention to it, and we are.
Nancy. Hi, Chair Powell. Nancy Marshall-Genzer with Marketplace. One more question on the lack of unanimity in today's decision, the two dissents. Was there talk during the meeting? I know you're not going to talk about what individuals said, but in general, was there talk during the meeting of cutting rates, and what was the case against that at the meeting?
Sure. So we have an economic go around where people talk about the economy, and then that's yesterday, and then today we have a monetary policy go around all the way around the table. Everyone gives their views. So the discussion around policy was the majority view was still what it has been, which is that inflation's running above target, maximum employment is right at target. That means policy should be a little bit restrictive, somewhat restrictive, because we want inflation to move all the way back to its target. So that's where people have been and still are. Two of our members felt that the time had come to cut, and that they, for the reasons that they're going to express, I won't tell you the reasons. They'll issue some kind of a thing in the next day or so. So But that's the story. And I would say, well argued, very thoughtfully argued all around the table, good arguments. And, it's a situation where, an unusual situation. The economy is in good shape, but it's an unusual situation where you have risks to both your employment mandate and your inflation mandate. That's the nature of a supply shock. And it's probably not surprising that there would be differences and different perspectives on that, as well as different views of where the neutral rate is, so that different views of how tight policy is. So we have those. I will say what you hope is that people, explain their positions very thoughtfully and clearly, and we absolutely had that today, all the way around the table. I would call it one of the better meetings I can recall from that standpoint.
And you've said you're waiting to be confident inflation is heading toward your 2% target before you start cutting rates. When you do get that confidence, would you be in favor of lowering rates right away?
It's not quite the way I would put it. I said that's why we think policy should be restrictive, is because inflation is above target. When we have risks to both goals, one of them is farther away from goal than the other, and that's inflation. Maximum employment's at goal, so that means policy should be tight, because tight policy is what brings inflation down. If you came to the view that the risks to the two were more in balance, that would imply that policy shouldn't be restrictive. It should be more neutral, more a neutral stance, and that would be somewhat lower than where we are now. No one knows exactly where that is. So that's the framework I think I'd be taking, and we'll just have to see. We're going to be obviously looking at a lot of data in the next cycle. It is one of the cycles where we have 2 employment and 2 inflation reports, and we'll see where that takes us.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for taking the question. Jeff Cox from CNBC.com. A metric that you like to cite a lot is the final sales to private domestic purchasers. That was down to a 1.2% gain in second quarter from 1.9% in Q1, suggesting that there's some softening in underlying demand. I just wondering if you look at that and you combine that with some of the housing numbers, the weakness that you acknowledged at the top of your remarks, that the housing market is in fact weak, and the inflation numbers from GDP today came down to 2.1% for headline, 2.5% for core. I'm wondering how much more movement you would need to see from these data points before you would be comfortable with cutting in, say, September.
It's going to be the total. Hard to answer that specifically. PDFP, I think, for the first half, private domestic final purchases, or final sales, as people call it, was 1.6 on the first half. GDP, I believe, was 1.2%. That's the whole half. You mentioned the quarters. So those are slower, but GDP is bumpy quarter to quarter, half to half, and often gets revised, after the fact. The labor market data we still think is continue to think is the best data we have on the economy, and that shows a 4.1% unemployment rate. It shows wages, still at a healthy level, but moving ever closer to what we would regard as long-run sustainable, consistent with longer-run productivity and 2% inflation. So the labor market is actually still quite solid. Inflation is above target, even ignoring tariffs. It's a little bit above target, and tariffs. So we're watching all of that, and again, trying to do the right thing in what is a challenging situation, because you're being pulled in 2 directions, and you have to decide which of those to go in. And actually, at some point, if they're sort of equally at risk, then you really want to be at a neutral policy stance, which we're not right now.
So it would be safe to say that if the data kind of stays in line with where it is right now, that you wouldn't be comfortable with cutting in September?
I'm not going to say that. No, I just think we're going to need to see the data, and it can go in many different directions. The inflation data and the employment data, and we're going to make a judgment based on all of the data and based on that balance of risks analysis that I mentioned.
Thank you.
Thanks, Chair Powell. Greg Robb from MarketWatch. The Treasury Secretary has said recently that it would be confusing for the markets if you stayed on as a governor after your term as chair ends. And I was wondering if you had any update for us on a decision on that front.
Sorry, I do not have any update for you. Thanks very much, everyone.
There's too late Jerome Powell holding a press conference. Granted, he was on time for the press conference, but too late once again. He will keep the rates where they're at with the Board of Governors. Very irritating situation. We'll see if President Trump ever comments on this. He likely will, as many successes happening today, signing H.R. 1815 into law, the VA Home Loan Program Reform Act, which amends Title 38 to United States Code to authorize the Secretary of Veteran Affairs to take certain actions in the case of a default of a home loan guaranteed by the Secretary and for other purposes. This should help at least 61,000, if not more, veterans right here in America. He's accompanied by Navy SEAL, former Navy SEAL, the Congressman Derek Van Orden of the 3rd Congressional District in Wisconsin. Also Representative Mike Bose, the Congressman from the 12th District of Illinois, and Congressman Ralph Norman of the Palmetto State, South Carolina, stating that President Trump is a phenom for making government for people, and reposting that on True Social. The excitement behind that, so Republican caucus unified. There is no question about that as they seek to make America great again. But the Fed Chair, Jerome Powell, keeping rates where they're at. There might be a revisit of this in September. I'm sure we'll have comments later on from President Trump. And some other breaking news before we end this broadcast. We have Portugal that has announced a plan for $4.6 billion in port investments by 2035, mostly private. Portugal's government announced this on Wednesday, an investment plan worth 4 billion euros, approximately 4.6, as the Senate has confirmed Susan Menarez as the CDC director. And in the coming months, we could potentially have some great interviews with those at the CDC, as well as other agencies within your government, tackling all of what's been rather a quick-moving news cycle. And I will be taking a little bit of an R&R, but seeing you in the next few days. Be sure tomorrow to catch The Voice of Reason at 6 o'clock every Thursday for a punchline and politics, also sports, music, culture. We have some great lined up interviews for you to enjoy and to dive into things like why the Electoral College still matters in 2025. Now, you might be wondering as well, I have to cut into culture, so I'm going to throw this out there. This whole Sydney Sweeney controversy, my good friend CJ Pearson from Georgia, also running for state rep, commenting on Fox News Opinion. Let's cut the nonsense. Liberal women aren't mad at Sydney Sweeney because she's setting women back. They're mad because she's hot, white, young, and blonde. I would have to agree with my friend, CJ Pearson. And they're mad that corporations are finally waking up to that truth. The American people are done with woke. And Sydney Sweeney is a beautiful young woman. And we like the artwork and the acting she brings, regular entertainment for countless Americans. So knock it off to the woke corporate left nonsense going on there, as we thank our sponsors on the right side of history. allfamilypharmacy.com/RSBN. It's your go-to for pharmaceuticals and getting around the PBMs that want to make sure you don't have the life-saving medication, whether it's stocking up your medicine cabinet or simply taking these great life-saving medications on the road with you by train, plane, or automobile this summer. Ivermectin, antibiotics, hydrochloroquine, NAD+, methylene blue, the emergency medical kits, and 200 essential medications that can save your life. And whether it's tsunami caused by an 8.7 magnitude earthquake in Japan that's hit our west coast, and a whole host of Aleutian Islands up to Anchorage into Ketchikan, a huge span of the northern Pacific in Alaska, as well as western Canada and British Columbia, or the Texas floods, the Guadalupe River. you need to stock your medicine cabinets. It's common sense in case you can't get to the pharmacy or in case the pharmacy is discriminating against you. allfamilypharmacy.com/RSBN, the meds you trust, delivered right to your door. And Michael Kunzler, the great co-owner of this organization, slapping on another 25% off. So use code RSBN10 for that 10% off, but an additional 25, you get 35% off. You scan the QR code there and order today. No red tape, no bureaucracy. It just gets right to your door, all in 24 hours. Doctors and pharmacists committed to your health, nurses as well that are patriots at allfamilypharmacy.com/RSBN. Once you have your health in line, make sure that you trade and bet on the biggest questions facing the United States. Who will President Trump pardon this year? Maybe will Elon Musk start that third party, the American Party? See what happens there. Kalshi.com/RSBN. Hit that QR code now and trade on anything. Also, Angel Paste, the miracle cream. You see me use the OG cream here on the network to have my skin glowing and to get rid of that nasty, dry skin that hits every now and again. AngelPaste.com is a Christian-owned company. They hire veterans out of Spring, Texas, off the Gulf of America. They have a natural mosquito spray as well and a facial spray, both great for the summertime. Experience the miracle today at AngelPaste.com. Thank you to all our sponsors here on the right side of history. And we will see you tomorrow night for The Voice of Reason. We also have another broadcast with Matthew Alvarez coming up in 10 minutes. So be sure to stay tuned for that. But for all America First updates and exclusive offers, in case you can't catch a broadcast or two, why would you want to miss this live desk? Go to the written word, rsbnetwork.com/newsletter. You have great writers like Dylan Burrows and others who dive into the big topics hitting America today, including the fact that our Secretary of Defense, he might run for governor of Tennessee. Pete Hegseth considering that. So for all that breaking news in the written word, make sure you hit rsbnetwork.com/newsletter. They also have a great Sunday devotional that I like to read before I'm off to church. And with that, I'm off on a few days of vacation. So I hope you're enjoying the summer with family and friends. I'm about to do the same, as it is a golden era. What a June and July for President Donald Trump, for this administration, and for liberty and justice for all. And some of these stories unfolding in real time, I'm sure we'll get more details, and we'll bring it right to you. For unbridled access to the government you put into place on November 5th of last year, RSBN Live Desk, it's your go-to for all of your information outside and inside of the Beltway. For all of my colleagues here at Right Side Broadcasting Network, I'm Robert McNeely. We'll see you soon.
Welcome to Right Side Broadcasting Network, your trusted conservative news outlet. At RSBN, we deliver the truth when the mainstream media falls short. Since 2015, we've proudly broadcasted every single one of President Trump's iconic MAGA rallies, bringing you the excitement and energy live before anyone else. By watching RSBN, you get an unfiltered front row view of the action on the ground. We interview the crowds to give a voice to millions of Americans just like you. We show you President Trump's speeches in their entirety, free from interruptions and censorship. We cover the stories that matter to you with the integrity and passion you deserve. Thank you for choosing RSBN as your home for America First News. Together, we stand strong, united, and informed. So join us and be part of the right side of history.
Hey y'all, it's Silk from the Diamond and Silk Chit Chat Live Show. Look, don't forget to check me out right here on RSBN Network. Be sure to watch the show on Right Side Broadcasting Network, and I want you to support Right Side Broadcasting Network. Yes, it's imperative that you do so, okay? I look to see y'all soon. Bye-bye.